number 1 for Korean.
안녕하세요. 만나서 반갑습니다. It is a pleasure for me to be here and my colleagues from Pacific Environment. And I do want to start by thanking and acknowledging the leaders with us. Minister Cho Seung-wan, the Honorable Park Young-jun, the Honorable Ambassador Matthias Franke, Mr. Kim Yoon-kyum, Professor Song Hwa-cho, Professor Lee Han-sok, and Itai Madamomben. For the first time in my entire career, I am wearing white sneakers with my dress clothes. I was told by my fashion-forward Korean colleagues that I will be ultra-chic if I do so. Let me have a show of hands for a second. Who else is wearing white sneakers here? Anyone else? Okay. Tomorrow, if you wear white sneakers, I will talk to the World Ocean Forum leadership and we will create a white sneaker subcommittee. This is my first time in Busan, a city that aspires to be the center of global innovation through Expo 2030 and as the first floating maritime city. These ideas unite the city's current status as a world-leading port with its desire in the future to model how to mitigate the sea level rise that climate change will cause. Congratulations to Busan and its leaders for their hope and their vision. The oceans divide us, separating the continents and island nations from each other. They also connect us economically through trade and shipping, sustaining us as one of humanity's most important sources of food, and spiritually through shared love for the vast, wildlife-filled, watery world that makes up most of our planet's surface. The World Ocean Forum brings us together to prepare a successful global future in fields such as shipping and shipbuilding, fisheries, marine policies, and international cooperation in protecting the oceans and its communities and wildlife. I'm so pleased to be here with you. Let me tell you briefly about myself. I come from immigrants to the United States from Ukraine. I secured a law degree and surprised myself by using it to go into the field of environmental policy, which I never anticipated. I became an environmentalist in the most traditional way at first, in the first years of my career, working to protect forests from logging, endangered wildlife from disappearing, and communities from industrial air and water pollution. I never expected in these later years to spend my time and energy on issues involving TEU containers, the merits of hydrogen fuels, and port infrastructure in the Pacific Rim countries. This happened, though, because energy work and climate change work have moved to the forefront and become the organizing principle for the environmental field. Indeed, more fundamentally, climate change is becoming and needs to be the organizing principle globally for our economic life and our societies. Now today, I know I am among colleagues who are already convinced of the perils and the importance of addressing climate change. I don't need to touch your hearts with stories about the harm that climate change is causing currently. Every day and every week brings examples. The hurricane in Florida that flattened entire cities, the wildfires in my home state of California that engulf the skies of San Francisco and that wipe out entire towns, the recent notorious typhoon in this country, and the rainfall in Seoul that was the heaviest in 100 years, but probably won't be the heaviest in the next 100 years. People worry about the cost of leaving behind fossil fuels, but the loss of lives and property and economic life and businesses to these disasters totals so much more. The conference brings us together to prepare a global future. My colleagues and I at Pacific Environment are devoted to leading a clean energy conversion of the shipping industry. The conference will engage us with important discussions of policy choices, quantitative analyses, and the costs and benefits of various solutions in the marine and climate change fields. However, because I have the special honor of offering introductory remarks, and knowing that we are in solidarity in accepting the reality of climate change and the need for cooperative action, I'd like to offer some thoughts that might shape our discussions in coming days. I want to raise an alarm. I want to raise an alarm on a new form of climate denial. Now, the original climate denial was a very crude form of obstruction by those who knew better but wanted to keep profiting from fossil fuels, no matter the cost. The new climate denial is much more subtle, and it comes from within ourselves. It comes from people who accept climate change and its dangers, who accept and understand the existential danger to all of our society and to our planet. The denial comes, nonetheless, from our own complacency and what Sigmund Freud would call the immense potential of humans to deny what's right in front of them. Scientists tell us we need to act immediately and boldly because we're using up the atmosphere and the oceans, and the carbon budget that's left is running out much too fast. And yet, I hear too many confidently predicting the use of fossil fuels well into the 2040s or 2050s or even 2060, nearly 4 decades from now. Those casually predicting fossil fuel use for 40 years, often see themselves, describe themselves as hard-headed realists and pragmatists, though in fact they engage in a fantasy of magical thinking, denying the clear truth in front of them. We are, all of us, already facing grave peril from current harms from climate change. Even were we to end all new greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this conference in a few days, the existing atmospheric and oceanic load from greenhouse gases would warm the Earth for many decades and produce hosts of harms. Yet some confidently suggest we can increase the carbon load, not for a few years, but for generations. In 2060, 40 years from now, virtually everybody in this room, including myself, will be off the stage and will no longer be working, except the most junior among us. Almost every government official here today, every CEO will have retired, to be replaced not just by your successor, but 40 years from now, by your successor's successor's successor. Let's not leave these problems to them. I am not speaking today to those in the world who may be cynical and happy to defer aggressive action till after they retire. With this audience, I am talking to people who understand climate change and want to help protect our world. So you know that whatever targets we set for 2040 and 2050 and 2060, it's what we do in the coming decade. It's what we do in this next year and 3 years and 5 years that will make all the difference. The first principle, the first form of new climate denial, accepting the reality of climate change while denying the imperative of rapid and bold industrial change. The second category of the new climate denial is to over-focus on the obstacles to transition. I emphasize the word over in over-focus because there surely are many obstacles that warrant attention. It is very hard to transition an economy. Fossil fuels do have a high energy density. Fossil fuels can appear cheap at the front end, although only at the front end, because we wouldn't be doing this whole exercise if it weren't that fossil fuels cause massively expensive and harmful externalities that we all pay. We are in a car driving toward a cliff. We're driving toward a cliff. We're not sure where the cliff's edge begins because scientists tell us that tipping points might move the edge closer to us. But they are sure that we are reaching it and will, if we do not stop this car, suffer horrendous and likely irreversible damage. And we can all see our world is starting to go over that cliff. The drivers of the car, all of us, the drivers of the car need to pump the brakes firmly and with commitment. They have no time to worry that they might use too much brake fluid or cause tread damage to the tires or harm a bumper. When your house is burning, you do not call the fire department to schedule an appointment in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. The second new climate denial is to emphasize the costs of the transition off fossil fuels, how much it will cost us, how difficult it will be, taking attention away from the fact that the transition must be done urgently and will actually save us gazillions of dollars in harms and costs. Indeed, the word transition is now too soft a word for the rapid changes we need because we together failed to act earlier. We need to hit the brakes hard, starting now. Now, the third type of new climate denial arises within my own environmental community for perfectly good reasons, but reasons that need to change. It is the denial of the need for some kinds of technological geoengineering to pull greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and probably out of the oceans. Environmentalists typically oppose this type of approach for two reasons. First, the precautionary principle that massive engineering almost always produces unintended consequences and often quite harmful ones. And second, a well-founded concern that advocacy for technological solutions can be a pretext by fossil fuel leaders to continue their emissions and defer action into the far future. Nonetheless, we have waited too long and likely cannot solve climate change merely by turning off the tap of fossil fuels. Indeed, we must turn off the tap of fossil fuels. You don't start to mop up the floor while the bathtub is still overflowing. But we will also have to do some mopping. Even when we move off fossil fuels entirely, we will need to find ways to geoengineer to avoid the worst harms to the planet and to our societies and ourselves. Opposition to geoengineering is the third type of new climate denial, and we will need to overcome it. The fourth new climate denial is to rely on offsets. The argument goes, we will simply keep pumping out greenhouse gases through the burning of fossil fuels, and we'll plant trees and take other corrective actions to offset the emissions. We'll burn biomass from tree farms in a supposedly virtuous cycle of net zero emissions. It's not going to work. In a world in which we are going to overshoot our carbon budget and will need geoengineering to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and oceans, it makes no sense to pull it out and then put it up again. It makes no sense to burn it, putting it back up in the skies and into the oceans. We're trying to pull it out and reduce it. Offsets are too complicated, too rife with potential for corruption, poor execution, misaccounting, and injustice. The fourth type of new climate denial, accepting the reality of climate change, yet failing to accept the need to cease emitting greenhouse gases, to believe we can keep using fossil fuels indefinitely and solve the climate change emergency through a too clever, too complicated, too complex scheme of global accounting. I have spoken from my heart about things I deeply care about. And despite my concerns, I have great hopes that we will succeed together. We will build floating cities. We will protect island nations and the ocean's great constellations of wildlife. We will create new clean energy economies in which humankind can thrive. We will tap into human resilience and creativity. We may not agree on everything, but we can and must work together. I hope my ideas, offered with humility, may have moved you and may shape your thinking about the need for boldness, speed, courage, and justice. I'm grateful again for the invitation to talk to you today. I look forward to discussions with you and meals together and getting to know each other better. Thank you again to our hosts and distinguished leaders. And finally, I thank my very fashionable Korean colleagues for teaching me to wear white sneakers to give a keynote address. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, General.